What's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to talk about dynamic CSS styling with the nth-of-type selector. That probably sounds scary to you, but what I'm going to tell you is it's quite easy and anybody can do it. So what is the nth-of-type selector and how does it work? Before we get into the notes, let's just go check out a practical example. Many people have reviews or testimonials on their website, and you might want to be putting that into a query loop with bricks where you have a custom post type for reviews, testimonials, or whatever you want. So if you're query looping over something, you have ACF repeaters or metabox clonable fields where you're managing data on the back end. You don't want to have to jump into the builder and always change those styles. So you can use nth-of-type selector to style odd and even or other type of mathematical numbers, how you want to style your elements. So in this example, we're just using odd and even. So odd number divs are going to have this style with a white background. Even number divs are going to have this other style with a black background and the white text. So if we inspect this here, what I'm going to do is duplicate some of these divs to show you how it works. So this last one with the black background, I'm going to duplicate that. And then I'm going to duplicate it one more time. And what you'll see is now we have an odd, even, and the styles just keep going down the page. You don't have to open the builder, change your styles. We let the CSS do the hard work for us. And that's the beauty of the nth-of-type. One more thing that I have noticed when using this is nth-of-type is targeting the element tag type. So a div, a paragraph, a list item. So if I have this one right here and it's a div and I change this tag to a P, it's not going to have the proper styles because nth-of-type is targeting the type. So if I change that back to a div, you'll see it pop up how we want it to. The other item is with this class, because I've set up my nth-of-type based on this class. If I take that away, now you'll notice all the styles, even though it's a div, it doesn't have our class on that div, so it's not going to get its styling. So the styling has broke, and so all we need to do is duplicate that, delete that, and we're back good again. So this is a practical example of nth-of-type. And for the rest of the video, I'm going to show you how to build the structure panel and how the CSS works and dive into that in more detail. Before we get started, let's go through some of the notes. So the nth-of-type selector targets elements of the same type, such as divs, paragraphs, headings. You get the picture. It also allows you to style specific elements based on their order, ignoring other type of elements in between. So if we had some headings in between these containers, you would not see the styling apply to those because they aren't the same type. They would be an H tag. Here's how I use nth-of-type selector. I target the element type based on a unique class name, and I use BIM naming, so every element has a unique class name. And I'm using this naming convention quote, _container for my containers. So this section is going to be quote, and then everything else is going to have double underscores for whatever the element is in the structure panel. And this approach allows us to target a specific set of divs on the page, not all divs. The div that we want to target needs to have that BIM class name. So only the divs with this class are going to get those styles. You can read through the rest of these notes that I put together. Basically, nth-of-type even will style the second, fourth, and sixth. You could do odd, you could do different numbers, so just the third, or whatever you can come up with, and I'll let you research more ways to do it, but I'm just doing evens and odds in this tutorial. And using BIM naming really helps us target specifically what we want to style using the nth-of-type technique. and then I have some other selectors, and I will have this posted up on brickscoach.com. And I will also have this template where if you don't want to build it from scratch, it's going to be up there for less than $2. You can just buy it, install it as a template on your own website, and run through it. So you can either follow the tutorial, build it for free, or if you want to get it for a couple bucks, you can do that too. And I'll have links in the description down below where you can find all of that. All right, so let's dive into the builder and see what all of this looks like. So I'm going to remove the majority of the CSS here so that we've just got a really basic structure panel. And then I'm going to go through the structure panel, show you all the classes and all the default styles I have put on with Bricks Builder. So first off, we're going to have a section, and that section is going to have the class quote, because quote is my root selector name. The containers are going to be BIM with quote __ container. And then inside the container, we're going to have an image and a block. And inside the block, we're going to have an icon, heading, and rich text. So I'll leave this on the screen in case you want to take a screenshot, in case you want to take some notes here. But this is the structure we need to build. And I'll go through all the styles in the classes one more time. So we've got quote, quote __ container, quote __ image, quote __ block, icon, heading, rich text. And then what I did was I went and grabbed a URL for this image. So if you add your image and you're like, where do I put this URL? You can select an image, you can use dynamic data, or you can pop in external URL right here. And I found one on one of the free image websites for this tutorial. I changed the text here and the name here so that you can change that to however you want it on your website to follow along with this tutorial. So I duplicated that container and we have it set up. It's the exact same setup with the same class names, like so. So that's it for the structure and the classes. Let's dive into the styles. So I'm going to start with this section. And on the latest stable version of Bricks, which is, let's see, what is that? We are running Bricks 1.10.3. There's this little gear icon which shows you the modified settings here in the CSS styles. So if you select your class, which is on the section quote, click the modified icon, you can see we've got align cross axis is set to start. Column gap is set to a variable. I'm using automatic CSS variables, so whatever you want your column and row gap to be. And then the typography is set to text align left. And that is all the styles. We can also check it out with Advanced Themer Style Overview, and that kind of brings it into a nice, easy way to see here as well. So that's your quote styles. That's it. All right, let's move on to the container. I'm going to go click the class, click the modified, and we are a display grid for this container. Gap is set to space M, so that would be about 25 pixels if you don't have a CSS framework. And we have a grid template column set to a 2-column grid. Align items is set to stretch. And the layout padding is set on the top and bottom to space M. That's it for the container. You can see it here. On mobile, I've got set to grid 1 so that it stacks on mobile, but you could stack it at the mobile landscape view or wherever you want. But that's how I've got it set up for responsiveness. And we can check that out here. All right, let's dive into the image and click our class. Click the modified button. I've got object fit to cover. Layout is set to 100% width. And I have a border radius of a pretty large radius on the image here. And that is all the styles for the image. Here's Advanced Themer Style Overview, view of it. All right, on this block, not a lot going on here. I think it's just set to column and row gap set to var space m, and that's it. Yep, so no other styles there. The icon, I don't think there's much going on here. I've got a width of 50 and a height of 50 to get a nice even size here. And then I did a transform on it of 180 degrees because I didn't want to go select the other quote, but you could always go pick the other quote. I was being lazy and just threw 180. So if you take that away, just gonna flip it around. But that's what I'm gonna leave it at for now. It doesn't really matter. If you want to do something different. So we've got height 50, width 50, and then the different types here. So I think this is Ion Icons, the quote. You can use whatever you want. For the heading, let's go check it out. I don't think there's much going on here. It's an H3 tag. So I've got an H3 tag here. And it's a font size of var H1 to make it look bigger. But for our SEO, we want our tag to be an H3 because I would imagine you might have another heading up here that's an H2, like read our testimonials or whatever you want. So I'll leave that up to you as well, but there's not a lot going on as far as styles. On the rich text element, let's see what we got. I think just line height is set to a little bit smaller. I was playing around with something, so probably don't need to have that, but line height is just a little bit more in case I wanted it to have a little less space in between. And that's really it for the styles. Yep. One more thing to note on this rich text element, let's go check it out. It's not typical just text. What I've done is I added a span, so I wrapped it with a span and gave it a class called quote _ span. So any of my span text in this element is going to get a very specific style. And then it's also a little bit bold. So I did that, and you'll see in the custom CSS, which we're going to dive right into now, we have some styles for the quote. So now the magic really isn't working as we want. I'm going to duplicate this here, and what you'll see is, you know, nothing's really happening. So we need some custom CSS to get the nth-of-type selectors working properly. So I'm going to go grab that. I'm using VS Code to manage some of the CSS. VS Code is a really great code editor. If you're not using it, that's the one I use. So as soon as we pop this CSS styling in, you'll see we start to get a little bit cooler interaction. I've got some fancy stuff going on. Well, I consider it fancy. You might not consider it fancy, but I've got some hover effects and some animations. So the hover animation will change the quote to red and the name to red, and then straighten out a clip path so that when you hover it, it turns into a square. In default, the image has a clip path that kind of makes it point like an arrow, like so. So let's go through the styles, and when we get to the clip path part, I'll show you how I did that. All right, so we've got our container styles, and this is the most important part. We're on the section, so I can use the root selector here, which just means this class. And you could change it to whatever you want, and root is going to stay the same. So if you wanted to name it like my quotes or testimonials, you could change, bulk update it, and not change the CSS. If you were to change the container name, now that's a different story, but the root is set, which is nice. So our quote double underscore container, which is going to be this element here, nth type of, so we're going to have root double underscore container colon nth type of open parentheses even close parentheses. That's the syntax. If you want to do this type of CSS, you have to learn the syntax. That's all it really is. So I'm targeting my even nth of type divs with this class, okay? And we're going to set the padding to var space m, something like 25 pixels. The background color is black. So on all the evens, we're going to get the black background color, and the text is white, or the color is white. I'm using automatic CSS, so I had to override some of the styles. So I have root container nth of type even. So for all of those divs, I want the heading, so root double underscore heading, to be white. And I had to set that to important to override automatic CSS default styles for some of the headings. If you're not running a CSS, you probably don't have to do that. But if you notice that, you know, your text isn't quite looking right, like this, doesn't look quite right to me. Everything else looks right, but why is that heading? Why is my H3 not correct? Well, I had to do that override, so that's why that is there. Moving down, let's look at the order. So root double underscore container, so our container over here, specifically the even ones. So this is number 2, number 4. I want the image to be in a greater order than 0. So we could probably just put 1 here. So if we put order 1, it's going to have the text on the left and the order will bump down 1. So if we look at this, we have image block. Every one of them is image block, not block image. But with our order CSS, we can say, hey, I want the image to be ordered on the other side of the block and the text. So that's what that does. If we put this to 0, it's going to have it on the left side, which is no good. That's not what we want. We want it to be alternating. So order 1 will say, hey, order this exactly the opposite on our even nth of type even containers. How awesome is that? So now alternating containers will have that different order. Let's move to the image styles because the clip path, I think, makes this look a little bit fancier. So I go over to this clippy clip path and I'll refresh the page. And so this is this website. If you just type CSS clip path maker, it should pop up. It's bennettfeely.com/clippy. So when you come here over to the right, I was using left point and right point. So for my left clip path, I can grab this and then change the values. And I think I was just changing this one right here. So I set this one something like 20%. And then I need to change this one to like 20%. And it'll show you down here which ones you're messing with. Just to make this shape. So I copied that and brought it over to set my default images to have this type of look here. So if I change this to like 60, you'll see that that one node there changes to 60, but I've got it defaulted to 90. And so the flip side on the nth of type even is going to be 10%. So if we hop right down here, this is our root double underscore container nth of type even for our images. I just want the exact opposite of that. So instead of 90, it's 10%. And so you would have to play with that with Clippy. So if you came over here and used the right point, and you'll see this right here, you can change different values there. I got mine set up a little bit differently using this CSS, but you can play with that however you want it and change these values. Each one of these values is a node. So 10% from the left, 0 from the top is going to be that node there. And that's all that is. So I think that's kind of, it's hard to get these clip paths exactly right. You have to spend a little bit of time. The easiest way is to try to make this as equal as possible. 72 over here, and then try to set that to 72, or get it as close as you can, and then see which one you need to change, and just change that in your CSS editor. Okay. So the important thing to note about the images is our default images are all going to be this one type of polygon here, but our nth of type is going to be this type of polygon here. Then we have a hover style, which says root _ container. When I hover it, that's what this means, hover. I want to change the root image to have a different clip path of basically a square. So it's just going to animate that out as a squared image. To get that animation transition, on all of our images, we need to have a transition where we're targeting the clip path to set ease in and out at ½ second. So if we did this something like 10 seconds, you'll see really slowly they're going to animate. Very slowly. It's going to take 10 whole seconds to complete that animation. Okay, you get the point. So I'm setting that to ½ second. Nice, quick, snappy animation. If you take this transition off, it's going to just snap it immediately. So we give that transition so that we can have a nice, seamless, even transition, targeting the clip path, ease in and out at ½ second. And I don't need to set the transition anywhere else because it's just going to apply to all images, and we're not going to override like we did with our nth of type even. We don't need to override those because we've already declared it with our image class here. So you just need to set it once. Let's move on down to the icon styles, because this is just has nothing to do with nth of type. It's just to make it a little fancy. And we have this pulse animation. So we added that transition. So when I hover it, it's going to turn red. And we're not hovering the icon, we're hovering the container. So when you hover that container, let's go apply these. And we're setting that transition to interact with the color property, ease in and out ½ second. Everything's ease in and out ½ second. So how do we get it to do that? Well, let's say our root container, hover. Anytime I hover my root container, what do I want to do? Well, I want to change the icon to color primary. Nice and simple. So you're saying in this first bit here, when I hover my container, do this. So a space and then your icon class, change that color. Now for the animation, you'll see the pulse here. We have a little bit more in-depth CSS, so we're working with box shadow to get the pulse. So I set the box shadow to 0000, primary color. You could change it to red or green or whatever you want. And then I'm going to set an animation that I've named pulse-red, 5 seconds, run infinite. And then I gave it a border radius of 50% to get that circular pulse. I bet if I take that away, it won't be a circle, but let's see. Yeah, if you take that border radius 50% away, now it's a square, which is to me kind of weird looking. It's a weird pulse. So border radius 50%. Down here in the animations, we'll come back to this span here in a second. There's a keyframe, pulse-red, from 0 to 100%. So you could think of this as like a timeline from 0 on your timeline, which we've said is going to be 5 seconds here. We're going to start with a box shadow with our primary red color. That's my primary color on this website. And at 50% through our 5 second timeline, let's build that box shadow up and also start to transition its color out to transparent. And then 100% of our timeline, so all the way at 5 seconds, we're going to take the box shadow 20 pixels away and just kind of create this like pulse out effect. So that's a really easy way to create that pulsing effect with this CSS keyframe right here. And again, you don't need to have this to do the nth of type. I thought it looked cool. I like that pulse till I really pop out the quote. So I added that on to my icon by just using this animation pulse-red, 5 seconds infinite. A lot of CSS styling today. Okay, let's take a look at the span styles. So I also added that transition on our color property, ease in and out 1/2 second, so that when I hover the container, the span text will turn the primary color as well. So everything is synced up with my variables. The CSS is controlling everything. So when I hover that container, just change the color of the span element, root _span, which one more time, if we go into this rich text element, that's our root _span here. That's the class. It knows to target it and change the color to red. Pretty cool. So if we come down to this container here, well, before we move on, let's talk about one more thing. We have a media query. So we have a media query that is going to change the order of the image back to 0. So for our nth of type even, we have the order set to 1 so that on our even containers, the image is on the right. But on the mobile portrait, which is a max width of 478 pixels here, as is set up with bricks. So to do a media query in CSS, you just type @media, open parentheses, max width, 478 pixels, and then we can say what we want to do at that breakpoint. So what this is going to do is have our image on top, text on bottom, image on top, text on bottom, all the way through the different containers. If we hop back up to desktop and take that away, let's just take that out real quick. Now on mobile, it's going to be image on top, text. But then on our evens, it's text, image. And then the next one, it's like image, image, back to back. And I didn't really like that. So I added that little media query here so that our order is set to 0 on the image. Root container, nth of type even. What do we want to do on the evens? We want to set our root image to order 0, where our screen size max width is 478 pixels. A little complex there, but what you get now is a nice and uniform image, text, instead of image, text, text, image, image, text. Okay, let's move on. So I'm going to hop back up to my desktop breakpoint and come and check out this root container nth of type even. So our even numbered containers. So if I come down and I've got advanced themer here, I'm going to collapse these divs. If I change this div to something like a, let's see, section, all my styling is going to break because this CSS only works on the type of div with that class. So even though this element has the class quote _container, it's not a div type. So it's not going to apply there. So this has to be a div, and now we change it back. Everything's great. So if I add a heading in the middle here, you'll notice that nothing happens to this heading because this heading is not a div. It's an H tag, it's an H3. So we can add all of these elements in between here and our styling still won't break. So if we start duplicating, every time we come across one of these divs, it's going to alternate, no matter if we put stuff in between it. And that's the cool part of this selector. So we can have all this other stuff in between, but every time we hit these, it's going to alternate. So you probably wouldn't do that. You'd probably just have something like this alternating back and forth. So that is the tutorial on how to use nth of type selectors. What you got to remember is you have to set up your structure panel you have to target the right BIM class. So step 1, set up your structure. Step 2, give everything a unique class name, starting with this root, which is quote, and then everything has double underscore quote container, so on and so forth. So get your structure panel set up, and then you say, okay, well, what do I want to do? Well, I want every other container to have a different background color. Okay, that's easy. So we're up here on our quote class, and I just added the CSS there, but my declaration or my style rule is for my root containers, nth of type even. We want the padding to be this. We want the background color to be red. And now all of them change. So you design it once. And if you wanted to query loop through these, easy. You don't have to go in, open up the builder, and change the styling on each individual container. Just change it in the CSS one time, one place, and you're done. And if you ever wanted a different design, all you'd have to do is say, maybe we want this padding to be extra large. Maybe we want them, you know, maybe just the black ones to be extra large. If you wanted all of them to be extra large, well, that's pretty easy too. Let's just copy that. Take away our nth of type. So every root container or every container type is going to have the same padding and the same color, you know, all that stuff. We might not want to do that. But if we just wanted to change our padding on those containers, we could do that. Small, medium, large. You would just want to make sure that these are set up to be the same so that it's a nice and uniform style. Nice and easy. You could even do this in the builder if you didn't want to do it there. You can't really do the nth of type. You might could with the pseudo classes, but it's faster to just write the CSS yourself. So if you wanted your padding to be all the same on your container, come to this container here, come over here and change the padding to be whatever you want, medium, and that's what you would do. I set no padding on the left and right for my default state so that everything, I wish I could point with my finger, everything lines up straight right here with my mouse. That's why I did that style. Anyways, I hope this tutorial was useful. I like to make tutorials about dynamic data, dynamic styling, and I think this is a type of dynamic selector that lets you manage your data from the database through a custom post type or metabox or ACF, repeater, clonable fields, and let you manage the data and let the styling run the style on the front end of your website. So if you're interested in this type of tutorial, I have a lot more tutorials like this on my YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to get the latest update from me. And again, if you want all of this code and you don't want to have to type it all out yourself, this is up on brickscoach.com. I'll put a link in the comments, and it's going to be $1 or $2. It's going to be very affordable, a la carte. You buy it, you have it forever. You can use it wherever you want. It's yours. So I'll see you on the next one. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments down below. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Get to building some cool websites. Bye.